Alright then, so now let's take all the principles we've learned about object-oriented JavaScript in this chapter and apply them to the Weather App project. So I'm going to open this up and then go to index, then right click and go to open with live server. So we can see that project now in the browser. Now there's absolutely nothing wrong with this project. All the way we've coded it, everything works and we wouldn't need to change it if we didn't want to. However, since we just covered object-oriented programming and classes, I want to take that and use classes inside this project. So what I'm going to do is go over to script and then forecast.js. And now all of this stuff is responsible for going out and making API calls. So I want to take all of this stuff and bundle it together in one single class. We're encapsulating everything to do with a forecast in that class then. So let's start by saying class and creating one called forecast. And then inside this class, the first thing we need is a constructor. So let's create that. Now in this constructor, I want to define three properties on our forecast objects. The first one is going to be the key, which is this thing right here. The second one is going to be the base weather URI, which is this. And the third one, the base city URI, which is this. So let's define those. First of all, I'll say this.key is going to be equal to this thing right here. So let's grab that and paste it in. And then the next thing is going to be this.weather URI, which is going to be equal to this thing right here. So let's copy that and paste it in. And then the next thing is going to be this.city, oops, not in capitals, this.city URI, and set that equal to this thing which is down here. So let's copy all of that and paste it up here. Now I don't need to take in any parameters into this constructor because they're not going to have any unique properties. When we create a new forecast, they're all going to use the same properties. So that's our constructor pretty much done. Now the next thing I want to do is bundle these functions into that class as methods. But not only these two functions, I also want to bundle in this function as well, update city, because I still think that is kind of to do with the forecast. So all of these three functions are going to become methods inside the forecast class. So I'm going to start off with this one, update city. And what I'm going to do is come down here and create this method called update city. And ultimately, remember, this is the first method we call. Down here, when we update the city, we call update city first and we pass in a city. So over in forecast, let's create this method and take in that city. And inside this method, we basically want to do exactly the same thing as inside the update city over here. So this is going to be an asynchronous method. Now over here, when we created this method, we've not said this is asynchronous. And in a class to do that, all we do is pop the async keyword in front of the method name. Okay, so inside it, we need to grab all of this stuff, which we do over here. I'm going to cut that and I'm going to paste it inside this function. So what are we doing? Well, first of all, we're getting the city details and we're calling getCity. Now, instead of getCity, we're going to define getCity on here. So it will be ultimately this.getCity because then we're referring to the getCity method on this class. And the same for this, it's going to be this.getWeather. So we take in the city and we're trying to call these two methods, getCity by passing in the city and then getWeather by passing in the city details and the key. Then finally, we're returning this thing over here. So now what we need to do, instead of defining the getWeather down here and the getCity down here, is define them up here. So we call getCity first, so let's do that first. This is another asynchronous method, so we'll do that first of all, then say getCity. So now this is a function. When we call this, it's going to run this method. So inside this, we need to take as a parameter that city, which we pass it, so we'll take it in here. And inside this method, we need to still do most of this stuff down here. We need all of this. So we'll grab that. I'm going to cut it and I'm going to paste it up here in getCity. So paste that in and scoot this little bit along. And first of all, we don't need to redefine base because now we have that in city URI. So let's get rid of this line. First of all, we still need our query and that is still going to be the key, but this time it's this.key. because that's here now. And city is still city, which we take into the method. So that can stay the same. So let's scoot the response up. that is await fetch, and then we're concatenating base plus query. Now it's no longer called base, it's called city URI or this.city URI. So let's add that in there, this.city URI plus the query, which is this thing. And now we're making a request to that using fetch. So this is all the same as before. We're just basically changing the variable names. Then when we get the response, we're getting the data and awaiting response.json. So now we have that data being returned at the bottom. Okay, so now we get city and we're getting the city details, which are returned to us right there. Now we call this.getWeather and we pass in those city details, which is the key in fact. So now let's create getWeather on this class as well. So again, it's an asynchronous method. So async, and then it's called getWeather. And inside here, we need to pass the ID, which is this thing right here. So once we're inside this function, again, we're pretty much doing the same thing as down here. So let's now grab all of this and paste it up here instead. Scoot this in a little bit. And again, we don't need the base because we've already defined that up here at the top. It's now this.weather URI. The query is still going to be the ID right here. The key is now this.key because again, we stored it up here. And the response is now going to be this.weather URI instead of the base plus the query right here. So that's exactly the same now. And this is going to fetch that data, store it in response. Then we're calling response.json to get the JSON data. And then finally, we're returning that data. So that is all fine now. So now we can delete these empty functions and the key. And now we have everything stored inside this forecast class. And it should all work the same way. So let me save that. We still need to update the way we call these functions now over here in app.js. The first thing we need to do is create a new instance of the forecast class. So let me go over here, and at the top I'm going to say const forecast is equal to a new forecast object. So we're calling the constructor inside here and we're setting up that new object with these properties and these methods on it. Now the first thing I'm going to do is actually just comment all of this stuff out so it doesn't interfere with anything, and I'm going to log this forecast object to the console. So console.log forecast, just so we can see this. I'm going to save that and inspect over here and go to console, and we can see this forecast object now. And if we open that up, we can see these properties, and in the proto we can see all the methods, get city, and we can see get weather and update city. So now we can use this forecast object inside this file. So let me just undo a couple of steps what I've done because we don't want to comment all of this out anymore. And now whenever we call a method like update city, we need to actually call it on this thing right here, the forecast. So down here, we'll start at the start. We add an event listener. We listen for the submit event. We prevent the default, we get the city from the input field, then we're calling update city, but this is now stored on the forecast. So we say forecast, which is the instance of forecast we just created, dot update city. So now that's calling the method update city over here, and it's passing in the city a user typed into the input field. So that's really all we need to do because we're not calling any of the other methods get city or get weather from anywhere inside this file. All we're doing now is calling update UI, which is still up here. Update UI, that isn't on the class because it's not really to do with the weather. Now I want to get rid of this function here because we don't need this anymore. It's stored on the class. So let me get rid of that. Let me just make sure that's it. Oh, we have to say down here as well, forecast dot update city. This is checking the local storage, remember, but we're still calling update city here. And that is pretty much it, because once we call that method, it sparks the chain of calling this.getCity and this.getWeather, and then ultimately it returns this object. And that is the object that we're then passing into update UI over here. So now we're getting that back, we're passing the data in here, and everything should work the same. I say that, but still cross your fingers and hope that this works. So let me now change this to something like London and press enter. And this works. Let me try New York and press enter, and we get this over here. So this works as well. So All we've done again is taken all of those separate functions, anything to do with updating the city or the weather, and we've bundled those together as asynchronous methods inside a forecast class, and we also have a constructor to set the properties on that class. Then we create a new instance of that class with those properties and those methods attached to it, and down here we're just changing the call to update city, which was originally a function in this file, to forecast, which is the forecast class instance dot update city, and then passing in the city, and that is sparking the chain of different methods. So there we go, my friends. That is object-oriented JavaScript in practice. Now we will be doing another couple of projects later in the course, and they will both incorporate this kind of methodology as well. So it's not going to be your only practice with classes, but hopefully that gives you a better understanding now of how they work in a real project.